Hello, and a very warm welcome to all of you who are joining us today for this webinar on heritage and sustainability in a post-COVID-19 world, Building Back Better, which is organized as part of the ICROM lecture series. For those of you who do not yet know ICROM, it's an intergovernmental organization working in the service of 137 member states across the world to promote conservation of all forms of cultural heritage for the benefit of all people. Before we start, I'd like to inform you that we have set aside the last part of this webinar for a Q&A session. Please send us your questions and comments via the Q&A icon that you see at the bottom of the Zoom window. We are looking forward to your participation. In case we don't have time to put all of your questions to the speakers, please do send us an email and we'll get back to you. Today, we will focus on the interface between heritage and sustainability. The COVID-19 pandemic has urged us to confront critical questions and decisions concerning our future and the role of cultural heritage in it. Looking ahead, the post-COVID-19 phase provides an opportunity to build back better by rethinking and further strengthening the role of heritage in sustainable development in line with the United Nations 2030 agenda. Nevertheless, this will require the heritage sector to reconsider its position and proactively take concrete steps to advance social, environmental, and economic sustainability. The webinar will address this issue with particular focus on museums and their collections. Today, I'm joined by 4 speakers, and it's my very great pleasure to introduce them to you now. So if our speakers could kindly turn their video on. Thank you. Our first speaker is Sophia Labadi. Hello, Sophia. Sophia is a professor of heritage at the University of Kent in the UK and an Arts and Humanities Research Council Leadership Fellow on Heritage for Development. She also regularly acts as consultant for international organizations on projects and policymaking on culture. Professor Labadi has published widely on issues of migration and social justice in museums and on heritage and sustainable development. Her research has received many awards, and she has been an invited scholar in institutions in Africa, in the USA, the UK, including Stanford University and the Getty Conservation Institute. The second speaker will be Errol van der Wert. Hello, Errol. Errol is an art historian and museologist, and he is the director of the Textile Museum in Tilburg in the Netherlands. He's much interested in the role of heritage as an agent of change in society to contribute creating a better world. For him, heritage is not only about yesterday. He believes in the museum as part of a network organization dealing with social issues like sustainability and social innovation in design. With his innovative museum concept, the Textile Museum won national and international awards, such as the Best in Heritage Project of Influence in 2018. Our third speaker today is Viviane GOSSELIN. Hello, Viviane. Viviane joined the Museum of Vancouver team in 2010. Her work on historical and environmental literacy seeks to make museums more responsive, empathetic, and democratic public space that prompt people to recognize their own capacity to effect positive change. She is also a member of the advisory group for the Coalition of Museums for Climate Justice. And last but not least, our fourth speaker is Abubakar Sulesani. Hello, Abubakar. Abubakar is a senior lecturer in the Department of Archaeology, Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria, Nigeria. His research interests revolve around the past social-political systems of West African kingdoms and states, as well as their associated material cultures, with specific attention to northern Nigeria. He's responsible for the management of the Ahmadu Bello University Museum, which houses archaeological and ethnographic materials collected across Nigeria's ethnic groups. Abubakar is also involved in nationwide initiatives for the preservation and conservation of Nigeria's cultural heritage. Our speakers will be sharing their thoughts and experiences on how the heritage sector can make meaningful contributions towards social, environmental, and economic sustainability, taking into account the opportunity, or should I say the need, to build back better after COVID-19, and with a particular focus on museum collections. Two guiding questions have been proposed to our speakers, which I would like to share with you now before moving on to the presentations. So at this point, I kindly ask our speakers to turn their videos off. I'll be calling you when we start the presentations. Thank you, and very much looking forward to your presentations. Two questions have been posed to our speakers to ask them around which to structure their presentations. Firstly, what are the new opportunities for the heritage sector to help build back better in the post-COVID-19 world, taking into account the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN 2030 Agenda? Focus on new opportunities here. And secondly, what innovative and concrete actions can heritage organizations take in the post-COVID-19 world to reposition themselves and to further strengthen and demonstrate the role of heritage in the recovery process and in sustainable development? Our first speaker will be Sophia. Sophia, if you could please turn your camera on. Thank you. Sophia, what are your views about the post-COVID-19 world, and what would be your proposals for the heritage sector to help build back better after this global crisis? Over to you now, Sophia.
Okay, thank you, Jose. You can all hear me, right? So the COVID-19, the worst global crisis since the end of the Second World War, has been felt by many like an earthquake. It is difficult to know what the world post-coronavirus will be. Some, like the Canadian intellectual Naomi Klein, have warned that disaster capitalism can thrive on the pandemic. In other words, neoliberal free market policies might be reinforced as a result of COVID-19 and setbacks efforts to address the Sustainable Development Goals. Other people, including the French economist Thomas Piketty, believe that COVID-19 should be seen as a warning sign and as an opportunity to build back better. In relation to heritage and museum collections, I have 5 proposals to build back better after COVID-19. Proposal 1, collections and heritage sites are for people. Many people in our field have asked to change the focus of heritage protections from bricks and mortars to concentrating on local communities and rights holders. However, this shift has not yet fully occurred. A number of steps need first to happen. In terms of collections, access and participation should be as important as conservation. During some of my research, I have met museum directors who organize a lot of outreach activities. For them, the key is to stop being focused on the sanctity of collections to ensure that they can be used and animated by as many people as possible. And I think some of my colleagues today will go more into this idea. As for heritage sites, they need to stop being considered as authentic and as not having gone through any processes of change. Most heritage sites have been transformed over time, and such processes have recently accelerated with climate change. The issue, as I have written in some of my books, is that too often still, locals are only looked at positively when presented as being authentic, that is, as being frozen in time. This understanding is dangerous as it essentializes and stereotypes individuals, particularly in Africa. Heritage is constantly changing, and we need to stop using terms like authenticity that are inaccurate. Proposal 2. Heritage protection should not be considered as being intrinsically good. We, as heritage and museum professionals, need to move beyond the naive belief that the conservation of heritage and collections is intrinsically good and benevolent. In the name of heritage protection, basic human rights are still too often violated. The right to access and enjoyment of heritage is still jeopardized by land grabbing, for instance, by powerful politicians. I've witnessed that a lot. The livelihoods of people is being threatened by tourism development. The dignity of women is trampled all over the world to protect and continue intangible heritage practices. How to change this? A number of texts have recently called for a human rights-based approach to heritage. For instance, respecting, protecting, and promoting human rights is both an overall principle and a section of the 2015 UNESCO policy on World Heritage and Sustainable Development, which I have helped to draft. Therefore, legal texts have already recognized the importance of a human rights-based approach to heritage and museums. Aware that not many people understand the principles of the 2015 UNESCO policy, I have organized awareness-raising workshops and publications, and I've worked with heritage sites managers to implement this policy, both in Europe and in Africa. My proposal 4 is for us to be committed to social justice. So in addition to respecting human rights principles, the conservation of heritage and collections should be about social justice. A social justice approach is a commitment to social equality, sometimes through equity. It aims to provide individuals with the means to be and do whatever they value, to reiterate what Amartya Sen thinks about social justice. We, as museums and heritage professionals, need to recognize that heritage sites and museums have been used to exclude, marginalize, and dominate minorities. The Black Lives Matter movement has shown this very clearly. A social justice approach also reveals and disrupts systems of domination, discrimination, and exclusion. This can take different forms. For instance, in my latest edited volume called The Cultural Turn in International Aid, 2 Senegalese authors, Ibrahima Thiaw and Mohamed Lee, discuss how the European Union has attempted to rewrite the history of slavery at Gorée Island, and they denounce that approach by the EU. Another approach is proposed again in the 2015 UNESCO policy on World Heritage and Sustainable Development, and particularly its section on gender equality. During the drafting of this policy text, we discussed that access to some heritage sites is not allowed to women, including, for instance, Mount Athos in Greece. To address this situation, the 2015 policy requests governments to adopt compensation mechanisms when gender-rooted traditional practices at heritage sites are considered locally as discriminatory. My proposal 4 is quite related to proposal 3, and it's a commitment, or a stronger commitment, to disfranchised communities. The world of museums has excluded, marginalized, and dominated minorities. We need thus to pay particular attention to these communities. For instance, in my book on museums, immigrants, and social justice, I detailed the unauthorized occupation of the Immigration Museum in Paris by undocumented workers as a strategy by these workers to gain the legal right to remain in France. I also exposed the strengths and weaknesses of programs proposed by different museums to improve the language and employment skills of long-term immigrants population in different countries in Europe. The last chapter of this book recommends a number of steps to strengthen the programs on employment skill and language learning skills to make museums become fully committed to disfranchised communities. And my final proposal is to reform education and align it to the Sustainable Development Goals. I believe that the key reasons why all of the proposals that I've mentioned have not yet occurred is because heritage conservation is still too often separated from wider and contemporary challenges. This is, for instance, reflected in the wording of the Sustainable Development Goal 11.4, which calls for the strengthened efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage without any reference to wider challenges such as poverty or social justice. A change of mentalities is thus needed in our field, where heritage is considered as fully contributed to the Sustainable Development Goals and other global challenges. This change of mentalities will be facilitated when university courses and other training activities would have integrated sustainable development concerns. This would ensure that students who would then become the professionals of tomorrow consider normal the continuum between the protection of heritage and collections and the Sustainable Development Goals. I have, for instance, included concerns for heritage and sustainable development in my own teaching. However, I do acknowledge that there is still a lack of understanding of the contribution of heritage to global challenges. For these reasons, I'm currently leading the work on a policy guidance for e-commerce that explains how heritage contributes to each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, illustrated by specific example that can be reproduced. So these are my 5 proposals to build back better after COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia, for your thought-provoking and game-changing proposals. They resonate strongly with ICROM's people-centered approach and commitment to advance the United Nations 2030 agenda through its activities. We will see you back at the Q&A session. Thank you. Before moving on to the next presentation, I would kindly like to remind the people in the audience to avoid using the raise hand function. Please pose your questions using only the Q&A function. Thank you. I would now like to turn to Errol. Errol, based on the successful achievements of your museum, which include an award for the world's most innovative and influential concept in the field of heritage, what lessons, ideas, and suggestions can you share with us to transform our world and promote sustainable development through the work of museums? How can we reposition our museums for the future, taking into account the COVID-19 crisis? Over to you, Errol.
Thank you very much, Jose. Thank you very much, colleagues. I would like to start. My name is Errol van der Wert. I'm the director of the Dutch Textile Museums in the Netherlands, in Tilburg. And the COVID-19 pandemic is confronting and really challenging for our society. And many museums are confronted with substantial losses of income and will and cannot survive probably. However, I always see that there are new opportunities according to the raised situation, which might be outside of our comfort zone of the cultural domain. In general, I would like to say that collaborating, networking, sharing knowledge and experiences is a need in these times. And I would like to share our presentation here to deal how we deal with the raised circumstances. The Textile Museum is not a traditional museum. For ages, the city of Tilburg was the wool capital of the Netherlands, but the wool industry underwent a really rapid growth because of the steam machine, but suddenly it collapsed in the 60s. And many of the industrial buildings, like you can see on this slide, were destroyed as citizens lost their jobs, and the once so glorious past became a black page in the history of the city. Then on the remnants of hundreds and hundreds of years textile artisanship and industry, the city government started an initiative to establish a museum as a place of memory. The textile industry, you have to imagine, is still part of the city's DNA for generations of citizens who had jobs in this industry. What we did is that the combination of a restored industrial building, as you can see on the right of this picture, combined with the modern architecture, that's in a way reflecting the concept of our institute. What we try to do is creating a dialogue between the past and the present of the local and the European textile industry. And we had to make crucial steps. A transition from a place of memory, a more traditional museum, into a working museum. And what we did is that we challenged ourselves to make a next step. The preserved industrial heritage buildings, the heritage collection, they were the ingredients of a more classical museological approach. But it was our ambition to give back a bit of the city's former proudness on textiles. And we focused on a small niche in the top segment of the creative industry by starting to develop high-end textiles. And this was also the starting point for us of the transition of the museum by adding a lab facility to the museum concept. As you can see here in the middle, it's in between a textile studio and a real textile factory. Part of the old textile workers who were unemployed, they could start working as weavers, as knitters, and sometimes as guides in our museum. And now a complete laboratory with a modern fleet of high technology machines representing all the textile techniques are present in our premises. And the textile heart is really the beating heart of the living museum. And what we did is that we created an ideal place for artists, for designers, for fashion designers and students from all over the world, and facilitated them with these machines, the most modern yarns, and the knowledge and expertise of our product developers and technicians. And professionals like the artists and designers could work on innovative products and create textile art for international commissioners as great architects like Remcolas, but also for brands like Hermes, Nike, and car brands like Renault. But more than over 250 projects a year are executed here. And it's all about reinterpretation of heritage, sometimes an autonomous artwork, sometimes prototypes are developed, and research and development on textiles is executed. And what we make in this laboratory is that these fabrics, they are really popping up in high profile projects across the globe, from the Persian Gulf to the Parisian catwalk. And to give you a better idea, I will give you some examples. A tablecloth, a classical damask tablecloth, included by graffiti by these two designers, Victor and Rolf. For the Rothschild Bank, on top of the building, these division screens representing an old picture of the situation in the 19th century. Now it became a board for the people who were working there. The next one is the National Library. The National Library in Qatar. A big division screen which turned over an enormous building into an intimate space for presentations, for gatherings, etc., etc. Another one, also a local one, the local library, an important part in the city of Tilburg, which was divided by big curtains, as you can see here now. For Hermes, by Aiko Tezuka, this new interpretation of traditional Hermes symbols. But next to that ideal place to work, the museum offers also an ideal place to learn for talented young people and students from all over the globe. And for the visitors, they are giving open access to all the activities and can see it, the whole creative process lively. What about the collection? The collection is for us a source of knowledge and expertise for the artists and designers working in the lab. And the curators have the role of guides and translators through the collections. In a way, the traditional crafts are kept alive and passed to a next generation. We rethink the way we did things by now by adding new technology, modern yarns, and the vision of an artist. And the design of today for us is the heritage of tomorrow. So it's not a static thing. It's all about the reinterpretation of the work of our predecessors. And it's through reinterpretation by artists and designers that our shared cultural heritage-based legacy lives on for future generations. And now we are trying to reposition our museum for the future, because our world is rapidly changing. We can feel and see that around us because of digitalization, because of globalization. And all these developments affect the social, economical, and cultural domain. And to my opinion, the museum should more than before reflect on these changes by adjusting their mission and vision, and finally also their programs and in the target of their audiences they focus on. What about the pandemic? Is it changing the course of our museum? I think there is a yes and there's a no. I believe that in the pre-pandemic time, there was already an urgent need to reposition the museum in society. For me, the pandemic can function as an accelerator of the process which has been started already. And of course, we have to deal in a responsible way with the 1.5 meter economy affecting the visit of a museum. But I don't believe that this will be a sustainable model at the end. However, why not to take the opportunity to rethink the way we did things till now? For us, it was an extra impulse in investing in developing more online programming, like do-it-yourself workshops at home, in dyeing your own cloths with sustainable plants, but also online tours with a new experience, webinars like these, consultation hours with our experts. And next to that, we were investing in a much earlier stage than we planned before in virtual reality and augmented programs. And then next to that, we are also really reconsidering on more online meetings and less physical mobility, which is much more sustainable of our staff. However, these adaptations should not distract us from the original goals to reflect as a museum on. I think we should focus the world after the COVID in a more open view, that we have to focus on more than only cultural values. I think the most important changes in the social and economical domain, the museum should respond on. I can share with you a couple of these changements. At first, I see that recently economists, philosophers, visionaries announced the new industrial revolutions, the maker industry 2.0, which is about modern crafts. There is a desire for personalization of products by customers. There is a need to think about the alternative use of resources because we are exhausting the existing resources. There is also the possibility to introduce new technology in our production processes. And also beside that, new skills for young generations like creative thinking, like problem-solving skills, social interaction and communication are skills needed to deal with these mentioned changes. A second change, there is an increased need to stimulate participation of civilians and to democratize programming of museums to include all civilians and to promote diversity, to stay meaningful for everybody. We have to find new ways for new generations to include traditional and non-traditional visitors in social interaction and participation. And the museum should provide ways for self-discovery and a permanent education. The third change we see is the changing need of new generations of visitors. They have a different expectation of the role of the museum. The future visitor is demanding active participation, is demanding an experience. He or she would like to see storytelling and the role of the museum to reflect on social issues. How do we as a museum respond on that? Until now, the museum was focusing to only professionals and talented young people, the ideal place to make and the ideal place to learn. And we want to do something about it. So we were challenged to make a next step, to become a more inclusive makers museum for everybody, to include our visitors in an active participation. And the idea is that you enter the museum as a visitor and that you leave the premises as a maker. And that's the idea between some of the implementations we did. And by these, we want to anticipate on the first mentioned new industrial revolution. And more than ever, I think that people are inspired by creating and making. They are curious to see and understand the making process and the story behind the design product. In our lab, people are able to experience to become a maker by themselves and to produce and personalize their own design, like a shawl, a scarf, or socks, by selecting materials, patterns, choosing colors, as you can see on this image here. The second thing which we implemented is that next to the studio, we also included a junior lab, a derivative of the professional lab. Here, families and children can be acquainted with the possibilities of textiles. They are stimulated here to learn about the needed new 21st century skills like creative and innovative thinking. They will be educated in the awareness of the interest on sustainable production. We provide a world which is different from the formal school world. And next to that, we will respond to the need to stimulate participation of civilians, to democratize programming of the museum in interaction with community groups, to include all civilians and to promote diversity. We created an outreach program with a greenhouse in which we grow plants for dyeing, and we organize a program together with the neighboring communities to interact with us on this program. The museum is also starting to take responsibility for social responsibility by paying attention to contemporary subjects like sustainability. On the picture down, you can see that we included on our premises a network partner, and together with them, we will start a recycling and upcycling unit on our premises. Why? Because we feel morally obliged to do something on being the second biggest polluter in the world, and that's textiles. So we have to do something with that.
Errol, can I interrupt you a bit because we are running out of time. So if you could wait up a bit.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the last part is that we also take a responsibility in social innovation and inclusion by creating chances for people with a distance to the labor market, together developing design projects which will be exposed and sold in our museum shop. And we will take a stronger part in the role of the niche of the creative industry, in which we work together with designer collectives who will support traditional industries in rethinking their production process. And finally, we more than ever, we take a role in the regeneration and revitalizations of part of the cities in which we operate, and we will be an inclusive museum, and we will take our renewed role in society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Errol, for a very inspiring presentation. It is great to see the full power of a museum and its collections put into practice to make concrete contributions towards sustainability. Thank you. Now I will turn to Viviane, our third speaker.
Hello.
Viviane's presentation, sorry, Viviane, your presentation will introduce the work of the Coalition of Museums for Climate Justice and draw on concrete examples from the Museum of Vancouver to discuss how the development of environmentally sustainable museum practice can be achieved while furthering social justice goals. Over to you, Viviane. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jose. Thank you for having me. I'll start by acknowledging that I live on and present this talk on the unceded ancestral territories of the Matsqui, Kwantlen, Simiamo, and Kedzi people. I shall. How am I supposed to change my slide here? I'm not sure what's going on here.
Sorry, Viviane, maybe we
Yes.
can move on to Abubakar's while you figure that out, if you don't mind.
Maybe, oh, here, got it.
Okay,
Sorry about
thank
that.
you.
So the COVID experience has been described as a massive experiment, a tsunami, a collective house arrest, and my favorite, the biggest swimming lesson ever. All these qualifiers really point to the magnitude of the impact and long-lasting effect of the pandemic may have on our lives and on the planet. On a global scale, our reduction of movement and goods and humans has led to the biggest carbon crash ever recorded. So we know that this is an incidental side effect, and it's not really motivated by our concern for the planet. Having said that, there's helpful things that we've learned about ourselves. So we can adapt fast, we can be resourceful, we can make profound changes in our lives to save lives. And our actions have an enormous impact on our system, and we've seen that. I like to think of the COVID experience and frame it as an experiential learning. So through the senses, really, we got to experience an alternative urban life. So we smelled differently, we heard different sounds in the city. Because the air is cleaner, we got to see our surroundings and we breathe better. Our daily routine changed. So we work more from home, shop less, more chatting with the family, cook more, and spend more time outside. We also had more time to reflect on what's essential and what's not. So that massive disruption becomes an opportunity to adopt more sustainable lifestyle. We have seen and discussed that. What's happening is the framework from our old pre-COVID lives is still here. And it will be very tempting to revert back to this when the pandemic is over. So we need governments, community groups like museums to alter our cues, to help us change that baseline and develop new environmental attitude and habits. And so how can we do that? And what is the role of museum? Well, as cultural influencer. And so I kind of catalyze the definition of social influencer, how they call themselves and how they define themselves. And really, it will ring a bell for a museum professional. So influencers have the power to affect decisions of others based on authority, knowledge, position, and relationship with others, with the audience. And we know that historically, the museums have been used as an instrument to promote and normalize ideas about progress, colonization, white supremacy. Today, the museums continue to have a huge cultural clout and continues to be one of the most trusted source of information in the Western world. So we can leverage that to change the public's environmental thinking baseline. 4 concrete ways for the museum to help create these new stories of connections and reconnection with the natural world. So I have 4 kind of propositions. Develop outdoor programming, regardless of the missions and collections of the museums. We know that urban, that people, more time they spend in nature, more they reconnect and care about the environment. The use of collections to enhance the ecological literacy of the museum staff and the public. So instrumental use as opposed to collection as an end. Create programs that support holistic thinking, that helps people see the interconnectedness between humans and the natural world. And lastly, celebrate and embrace expressions of degrowth. Degrowth really is emphasize the need to reduce global consumptions and productions and advocate for a society that's just and ecologically sustainable. And so there, a way to do that is celebrate like the DIY communities, for example, frugal green innovations, food security initiatives. So I'm gonna, Jose really wanted something very concrete. So I'm gonna make reference very quickly to two sets of museum example at the Museum of Vancouver, two projects. One, Wild Things, the Power of Nature in Our Lives, and it will be able to see how these ideas are articulated, but I just wanna premise that those are not the ultimate solutions. We know that we have to go and much further. So the exhibition Wild Things is an exhibition that examines the urbanized relationship with nature in the city, with a focus on personal stories of encounter. The stories came from nature lovers, urban planners, designers, indigenous knowledge holders. There was an integration of indigenous perspective as alternative views on nature throughout the exhibition. There was an instrumental use of natural history specimen to discuss regional extirpation of species and the need for rewilding the city. Vancouver used to be cougar country, wolf country, grizzly country. The exhibition was the first one to really embody the notion of sustainability. So up to 70% of the exhibition was made of reclaimed material. And this was a prototype that helped us develop design and construction guidelines for our other exhibitions. The second project, Acts of Resistance, was an exhibition that, I'll stop and ask for a second for people to look at this beautiful images of the Iron Workers Memorial Bridge in Vancouver in July 2018. So what you see is our 7 giant banners and 7 people suspended from the bridge. This was an event, an intervention to what we call an aerial blockade to prevent an oil tanker from leaving the Port of Vancouver. Part of a larger protest to resist the expansion of a pipeline that would go and run from Edmonton to Vancouver. So we acquired these 6 of the 7 banners into our permanent collection. It intersected with key collecting areas, so contemporary Indigenous art, history of activism, and environmental sustainability. The exhibition was curated by an in-house Indigenous curator, Dr. Sharon Fortney. She worked in close collaboration with the Indigenous artists and Greenpeace, which is the environmental organization that instigated the blockade. Our conservator had meaningful discussion with the artists to talk about immediate treatment and future treatment. So generate a lot of conversations, and the picture that you see here is at the opening of the exhibition back in February. Little did we know that a few weeks later our lives would be changed forever. We can see in the images that really museums are able and bridge communities. But the big question is, can museum now become the bridge between the old and the new norms? Can museums play a critical role in creating conditions to achieve a just and equitable transition to a climate-safe future? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Viviane. Your presentation highlighted very clearly the important role that museums can, or rather should, play to proactively promote environmental sustainability in their communities of users, becoming therefore a true agent of change in this critical area for the humanity today. given the interconnections between socioeconomic and environmental aspects in sustainability. I think your insights and concrete examples there have very nicely complemented those of Sophia and Eros. Thank you. See you in the Q&A session.
Yeah.
Now, last but not least, I'll turn to our fourth speaker, Abubakar. Abubakar, how do you see the challenges and opportunities for heritage, in particular for museums in Nigeria, emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic? Over to you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Lou. And thank you, the three other presenters, for building a broader general framework upon which I will now key in my discussion from the context of Nigeria. My engagement in the conversation is from the point of specific situation with examples from the context of economically developing nation of Nigeria. So far, the country has recorded 26,000 COVID-19 cases, with 600 recorded deaths as a result of the pandemic. But the low number certainly is due to the low capacity for testing. The committee that guides the country to move out of the pandemic is working and advising every day, and with a recent pronouncement to open up the aviation sector and interstate movement starting from yesterday, but other critical sectors are locked down. The pandemic has greatly affected the economy, education, and the social well-being of the country. The monoculture economy that survives on oil and gas is struggling, that's ours, with near total lack of patronage in the international market as a result of the global shutdown. Museums and all associated tourism facilities are totally shut until official advisory clearance by the federal government is given. It is important, therefore, to understand how broken the socio-economic situation of the country is today as a result of the pandemic. The condition is actually so bad that all economic sectors are strategizing towards the sustainable recovery of both the economy and the population's well-being. Nigeria has over 50 registered national museums with sizable collections.
Excuse me, Abubakar, are you planning to share your presentation? Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh yeah. The country, Nigeria, has over 50 registered national museums with sizable collections. The collaborative REOC project led by ICROM in the year 2017 found over 50,000 objects hidden in the darkness of storages and inaccessible to the public. The partnership involving the National Museums of Nigeria, the Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, where I work, tried to improve its material and social conditions by enhancing their accessibility, visibility, and protection. The national project trained over 400 museum curators across the country and implemented the organization of over 50,000 objects at 13 museums. This set the stage for access to collections, initial physical access, but also paved the way for virtualization of those collections. With physical access made difficult by the pandemic, more and more museums are working towards making the heritage they conserve accessible to the public. This will facilitate the curation of permanent and temporary exhibition in the long run, where ethnographic objects of regional ethnic groups will stay side by side, thereby facilitating broader national engagement and engendering highly problematic concepts sorry, trying to move. Next. Yeah, problematic concepts of unity, peace, and social justice. The result of those activities in 2017 are the first step in making it possible and easier to digitize the collections. And now that museums have a better idea of what they have in their collections, they can also make use, they can also use that knowledge to curate new exhibition, both temporary and permanent, which may be more relevant in post-COVID-19 environment by tackling issues raised by the pandemic, to discuss issues like traditional medicine, how communities react to disasters, and the general well-being of communities. The reality, sorry, next slide. The reality of COVID-19 is relaxing the way we access museum collections and objects now. Museum curators are revisiting the way photography and visualization of collections and the way exhibitions are open to the general public via social media, video clips, and to some extent, WhatsApp. These are technologies that we are not comfortable with, a greater majority of our curators, but are hugely situated in the policies of museums in Nigeria. But the pandemic is opening up conversation and creating avenues for conversation about how best we can make use of these technologies, most of them social media, to open up to the public, the wealth, the assets that we have in our storages. So full digitalization occasioned by strategic control access to the museum will empower people and make heritage a powerful resource in the face of realities of the forthcoming new normal social ways of life. At the same time, it should be noted that the situation of ICT infrastructure in Nigeria is a big and serious problem, a reality likely shared by a majority of the world population, but our own institute, for instance, our own institute of the higher education is an example of the challenges of making learning and culture accessible. The available infrastructure is simply not at the level of being able to provide online learning affordably or reliably to the thousands of students living outside major metropolitan areas and universities. What has the pandemic changed in terms of the manner which the national government, learning and cultural institutions view ICT infrastructure and affordable access? The general suspicion about internet access and usage is radically changing with this pandemic, as I earlier said. Without clear idea of what will be safe to reopen learning and cultural institutions, government must give priority to upgrading ICT infrastructure and exploring other technological solutions to bringing culture and education to the people. Some museums in Nigeria are gradually opening space and even collaborating with radio and television stations to have specific discourse about heritage matters more than before. At the same time, the network of Ahmadu Bello University Zaria museums with 5 units have been spearheading and advocating the societal role of museums as centers of learning and socialization. They are quite specialized in nature, whose activities are tailored towards using their resources, facilities, and collections to provide not only not only knowledge about the past, but make them more engaging with children and physically challenged members of the society. Production of the assets also empower the provision of lifelong craftsmanship skills, production of traditional souvenir and gift items that service the needs of tourists and the visitor market. How can those collections be used as learning resources, especially in view of awakening knowledge about sciences, the importance of art and culture in bringing societies together and in healing? The case of National Museum Jos, which is a re-op beneficiary, successfully leverage heritage to celebrate and unite, as our re-op team witnessed at Jos on the 2018 International Museum Day, whereby many thousands celebrated their diverse cultural heritage on the museum ground. The 2020 International Museum Day, however, is certainly a sad one, thanks to the pandemic. The new normal may for some time be a problem for people to come closer, and will need to explore ways to achieve social cohesion while respecting physical distancing. The increasing aspiration by galleries to converge members of different ethnic groups, races, and economic standing is constrained now. But our university museum is considering ways of changing how its priceless collections, the archaeological and ethnographic, are sampled to douse tension and express yearnings of diverse national groups and interests. Most recently, I was involved in the preparation of a traveling exhibition on Nigeria's ancient rock art, a collaborative effort of Ahmadu Bello University Zaria, the National Museums of Nigeria, and Trust for African Rock Arts, TARA, with support from the US Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation, which was to be launched in March. The launch at the National Museum in Lagos was postponed, perhaps definitively, just 3 days before its launch. The exhibition and a project itself aim to generate dialogue and create a network of professionals and communities from different parts of Nigeria. The project partners are now considering how to make that exhibition available digitally. The previous efforts have created and facilitated avenues that we can build on now to have fully digitalized collections that very soon we'll think of making them virtually available to the general public. But this may not be too difficult, since most of the content is already, as I said, digitized. And the benefit of this is that it might be accessible to more people in the long run. But finally, it is expected that the economic crisis will affect how museums and heritage in general will be managed. Many public sector are being struck hard, especially with Nigeria's overdependence on oil income. It is important to recognize how vulnerable museums in Nigeria would be, given the threat to their roles as custodian of heritage, with unexpectedly huge funding cuts to heritage management sector. But universities, curators, and heritage academics are worried and thinking ahead for the new normal post-COVID-19 era. We know that our museum collections and the stories and lessons that they hold can inspire creativity and inspiration in our collective efforts in building back better. So with this conversation about the two specific projects and our university's deliberate policy to address issues of heritage, by which coincidentally 3-4 months ago, we have changed our name to Department of Archaeology and Heritage so that we address issues of heritage, and with what Sophia said about integrating issues of sustainability into our curriculum, I think.
Sorry, Abubakar, sorry to interrupt you, but we have to move on to the questions. So if you'd like to conclude, you.
Yeah, in fact, I was concluding that we are arming our students by way of training and improving capacity to see how we approach issues of sustainability of heritage generally. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Abubakar, for your in-depth analysis and for proposing concrete ways forward for museums to help build back better. Just as a point of clarification, the reorg initiative mentioned by Abubakar, it's a hands-on, result-oriented and team-building training activity provided by ICROM to unlock the potential of museum collections around the world through the reorganization of their storage. So if you are interested, you can find additional information about reorg on the ICROM website. At this point, I'd like to thank once again our panelists for their really inspiring and thought-provoking presentation. I wish to apologize, we are a bit late in the schedule. Just before moving on to the question and answer session, I would just like to stress the fundamental role of heritage conservation as an enabler of sustainability. Conservation ensures that our collections are kept in good condition and readily accessible for meaningful use over time. Conservation is also critical to inform our understanding of collections and therefore to support innovative ways in which they can be used to advance sustainable development. Through its worldwide mandate, ICROM is committed to promote the conservation and sustainable use of this precious resource for the benefit of present and future generations. Now, I would like to move on to the Q&A session. So please, if our fellow panelists could activate their videos, and I will pose the questions. Thank you. So the first question is for Sophia. Sophia, you talked about SDGs. So how do you think museums have the greatest potential to contribute? So what are the key goals to focus on? How can museum concretely help advance SDGs? And if you could give us a couple of examples. I kindly ask everyone to be brief because we are running late. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think I partially gave the answer in my talk, and I would refer the person who asked the question to my 2017 book on museum, immigrants, and social justice. Please let me know if you can't get the book. I could send you a link and some excerpts. So basically, I think museums can develop a whole lot of programs to leave no one behind, which is the slogan of the SDG. And I mentioned in my presentation my research on providing employment skills for immigrants and also language learning skills for immigrants. And the reason why in my research I focused on employment skills and language learning skills is because it has been proven by research that these are the two fundamental skills that immigrants lack the most, and they cannot access language learning skills, for instance, in the UK, because the courses are fully booked. So there's not even enough capacities for immigrants, newly arrived, but also people who have not arrived so quickly, long-term immigrants, to access those courses. So this is one area. And a second point is also for immigrants to use the space of the museum on their own terms. I think Viviane has shown a number of examples, and I know Canada has done a lot of work with Indigenous community, My favorite example, which is the one I developed in my book, is the occupation, unauthorized occupation by more than 4 months by undocumented immigrants of the Immigration Museum in Paris. And they occupied for a number of reasons, but the main reason was political. They wanted their legal right to remain in France, and they thought the museum was a symbol of the positive dimension of immigration. These immigrants have stayed in France for more than 10 years. In some cases, they could not get their legal right to remain in France. And so they were using the museum as a platform to try to convince the minister that they should change their mind about immigration and should give them their legal right to remain in France. If you want more information, please get access to my book. I develop all of these examples in my book, and the conclusion of my books also give a number of recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Now I move on to Errol for the next question. Errol, what advice do you have for other museums who want to follow your example and become museums of makers? So how might they go about it? Thank you.
Yeah, wait. It's okay now. I started in my in the beginning with saying that we have to rethink the things we did till now. Because the world around us is changing, and what we did is reflecting on the changements, especially according to the core business of our museum, and that's textile industry. It's in the DNA of the city, but I could imagine that in every community there is something which is really important. It's all about identity, and I think we have to find new ways to include more future generations to the museum, because till now we have been focusing in a really traditional way. And we have to broaden that because our societies are due to globalization changing, and we have to stay important for everybody. So everybody who's working in a museum should have that on its focus. And what we do especially is also facilitating the makers, because the makers are important to make new heritage. The design of today is the heritage of tomorrow. So I think it's really important that heritage is not a static thing. It's something which will go on forever. We today create new heritage for tomorrow, and the makers provide us with that. So it's important to have that connection in an active way with the makers, and especially to also involve people with different backgrounds, newcomers in the city, younger generations. It's really important to reflect on them. What are their needs? And not only to think about your values as a museum only.
Thank you very much, Errol. I'll move on now to Viviane with the next question. So Viviane, you showed how museums can be agents for social and climate justice. Can you tell us a bit more about how you are working with other museums on this? So how can interested museums get involved in this movement?
How can they get involved? They may want to visit the website of the Coalition of Museum for Climate Justice and join the social media platforms, very active on Facebook, where people exchange best practice, have questions, and it's a place to be inspired and to inspire others. I think working with also environmental organization and communities around the museums, and partnering and creating programs around the themes of sustainability, climate justice, social justice, I think will resonate with the communities that the museum serves. So really, it's there's the peers all around the world who are doing really interesting work, and at the same time, small wins really usually takes place locally and incrementally with people you can play with I think in close proximity. So so yeah, a bit of both, working with community partners who are like-minded really and believe in you know, crowdsource kind of approach. And just a bit like Errol, people become actors and makers in the making, and I think in that process believe in their ability to affect change when they are part of a larger movement.
Thanks a lot. We'll take one last question, this time for Abubakar. Abubakar, can you elaborate on the work you are doing with communities towards peace building? And what's the potential role for ICT, so information communication technology, in that? Can digitization democratize heritage? Over to you. Please unmute your microphone.
Oh, thank you so much. Our recent engagement, as because of through the rock art projects with the National Commission for Museums and Monuments, expose us to communities at different nooks and crannies of Nigeria, engaging with them about concepts of preservation, how communities will partake, personally, in the protection of their rock art monuments and monolith, across Nigeria. And we have built that trust and recognizing everyone as a stakeholder. And but taking that mission to the museum space, now is about organizing this myriad of cultural heritage to the museum store from different ethnic groups. The conversation that the museum initiates between members of the public who are interested in materials from their particular ethnic groups allows intercultural conversation. And it is expected that the end result of such inter-ethnic group conversation, facilitated by the product of cultural materials brought in by our projects, will bring something positive to that. But the other aspect of ICT is quite problematic. The infrastructures are not just there, but individually, people have access using their cell phone and what have you. And the best way is allowing and changing perception and even legal instrument of what we can do with artifacts. Now it's a bit problematic that they shouldn't, the level of they can go out to the public is constrained. But with these digital assets, we are making forward avenue, that with the next level of legislative or official endorsement of by museums and national museums of Nigeria to say, oh, they are for everyone, then museum curators will then begin to send them out for everyone to use, to appreciate, and consume. And that's the whole essence of it. And that's where we're heading towards, with our both projects now.
Great, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions. We have already run over our time. So at this point, I'd like to conclude the webinar firstly by thanking all of our speakers. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have so kindly given their time to be with us. And also our organizing team here at ICROM, who have been working hard behind the scenes to bring these webinars to you. I'd also like to thank all of you who have joined us today for your interest, for your questions, and for your patience. We are running late, as I said. And just to let you know, the recording of this webinar will soon be made available on the ICROM website, where you can also find other previous webinars from this lecture series, and also on ICROM's YouTube channel. So at this point, I'd like to say goodbye to you. Thank you very much to our panelists. It's been a pleasure and very informative and inspiring webinar. And for all of you who are watching us, you can also find information on our future webinars on the ICROM website if you search for our ICROM lecture series. And of course, don't forget to check our social media platforms. Thank you for being with us. I hope you will join us again soon. And in the meantime, please take care of yourselves and each other and take care of our common heritage. Thank you very much and goodbye. Stay safe.